always happened. Living a life of victory and learning from Joshua how to do that, how they had success, how they faced struggles, how they were able to take the promised land after so many years and second generation of being able to do that. Today the idea is how to get things in order. The concept of getting things in order helps us to have victory. So we're going to, wasn't kidding, we're going to take a look all the way from 14 through 24 and take a look at little highlights as they have put things in order, as God has put things in order for them, and the victory comes from doing that. So what have we been doing? Well, it's been a quick examination of the book of Joshua. In order to do that, we've just been doing summary sections as we go along. Hopefully you've been able to read through as well, and you're getting some material, the background information, and you're picking up and being able to put that into your own life as well. We've been doing this because we need hope in troubled times, and life is always changing. We can learn that in Joshua as God shows them, even during the transitions in life, even how things are adjusting, God can walk you through and provide victory. It's a lesson that I think not only we receive, but it's a lesson that we can then share with others around us that are struggling with life and trying to find out where they fit and what the future looks like and where they are with the general things of life. Life changes. Is that true? Happy 150 Canada. We've been watching a number of the series, TV information about the story of Canada, right? Canada, our story, how the world would be different without Canada. And you see the amount of changes just in those 150 years, let alone all the history before the 150 years. But it's a reminder that no matter where you are as a part of that, life continues to change. We're blessed in so many ways, as Dick was talking about this morning. We're blessed. There's so many good things going on, and a part of that, a main part of that, is because we have connection to God who loves us, cares for us, and offers us all of these promises. The Israelites have been able to take the promised land in the book of Joshua. At the beginning, they were struggling with it. Then they start to take it, and we were looking at the concepts that go along with that. They've been able to take the promised land because God is a God of promise. That has not changed. The story in Joshua is the story today. They took the steps of faith that God called them to, and he blessed their efforts. He said, here's what I want you to do, and then he waited for them to take the effort. He does the same for us today. They worked together and they paid attention to the details. It wasn't just about one person's victory. They had to do it God's way. When they walked around the walls of Jericho, they had to do it as God said, and they had to do it as a group. They learned to appreciate second chances, and so do we. We're going to fail along the way. But with second chances, we can still have victory. They learned who was really in control. The main account of that reminds us is that God held the sun still for a day. That will tell you who's in control. But in your life, you have standing stones as well, where you realize this is God. It's not just me and my efforts, but God has been doing this all along. Those little fingerprints through your life to see, no, it was God that did that. And through all of these steps, God has provided victory. But it was victory almost. And that is, if they did it God's way, there was always victory. But if they did it their way, that victory was not assured. Today we finish. We finish taking a look at how God put things in order. This passage in Joshua 11:23 summarizes what's gone on so far. It says, so Joshua took the entire land just as the Lord had directed Moses, and he gave it as an inheritance to Israel according to their tribal divisions. Last week we looked at how they had complete victory doing it God's way. This week we look at the promise was also the tribal divisions. See, that was important too. They had to know where they were going to live. Okay, we've got here. Now we're at the promised land. Now what? Well, if you're from this tribe, you're going to live here. If you're from this tribe, you're going to be here. Here's where you're going. Here's how you're going to settle in. Here's your permanence. You've been used to transition. You've been used to wandering. But here's the permanence that comes from it. But then it says, then the land had rest from war. This is a good summary one for Joshua because it shows God provided the victory. And when they did it his way, they had victory every time. Now we read later that said the number of areas yet to be taken because those are the areas where they weren't faithful. Only God can provide order from chaos. Anybody like these things? Somebody takes a picture and chops it up in a bunch of little chunks for some reason and says that's entertainment. But you know what it reminds us of? You look at something like this and you say, well, how much order has God brought out of my chaos? Is this kind of how I feel and where my life is at? I don't even know where the edges are. Right? I don't have no clue what the main picture is. I don't have the overview. I just feel scattered. Or is it a little more, oh, that's the ideal. There's the picture. Here's what life could be. But all I see is the chaos. How do I get from that to that? But at least you have an ideal in mind. Maybe it's, well, you know, I've been doing this for a while and at least I know the boundaries. You know, I know where it goes and where it ends. Could be you're a little farther into the process and, you know, I got the main thing figured out. Other areas are lacking, but it's a lot better than it was. Naomi and Carrie are looking at each other. When did he do a puzzle this week? You know, I'm just a man of wonders. It's just whatever happened, happened. Maybe you're at this stage of life. You know, you're a lot closer to the end and you say, I really know what's going on. There's just a few things left. Come, Lord Jesus, come. But I really have assurance in the whole concept. I know the boundaries. It's almost done and I'm good with that. Because one day maybe you get there. Maybe the puzzle is actually complete. This is a puzzle of your whole life, but maybe this imagery is just one section of your life, right? I'm working on a puzzle of my finances, and I'm working on a puzzle of my spiritual understanding, and I'm working in a puzzle of my generosity. I'm working on a puzzle of the different parts of your life, and you say, I've got this one put together a lot. This one I have trouble working on. Now, you may wonder how I was able to do this, because I'm really not a puzzle person. What I did was take apart a puzzle that Naomi had. So these are all pictures in reverse. She did the work, I just took it apart. Is it easier to mess it up or make it right? Mess it up. Isn't it? You can have something and then it's pretty easy to mess it up. I brought my Rubik's Cube. See, doesn't that look nice? That side looks pretty nice. That's about the only side I can show you that side. That looks pretty nice. What happens when I show you that side? Or that one? This is what happens when I play with a Rubik's Cube for too long. I broke the pieces, snapped them right off the cube. I was showing Kira how to do it, and she was getting pretty good at it. We could do one side, and I could get the top, and we almost had two sides at a time. But if that was a good functioning Rubik's Cube, it's a whole lot easier to mess it up than it is to make it right. But that's life. You think, what do I have in order? And then all of a sudden it's not in order. God knows that. Look at the story of Joshua. The same sort of thing. When we let God direct us and how the parts fit together, then we do have order. He, unlike us, can see the entire whole picture before we get started, and he knows how to make it right. He knows how to get order out of chaos. You can struggle, or you can surrender. When we were doing this and I was showing Kira how to do it, she would say, well, how do I do this? And I say, let my fingers show you. You just tick, 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 and that's it. But it's hard to explain that. It's a lot easier just to do it and hand it back to her and say, do it that way. It took about 2.5 hours and she was able to do it. It did interrupt my sermon time, but it was important. The choice is up to us. Do we want order or do we want chaos? Is it really as simple as that? Well, broken down, it kind of is. Do you want to do it God's way or your way? Just think of the parts of your life that just aren't settled. Well, that's usually because we're not doing it God's way. He wants to bring order to us. Talking about a Rubik's Cube, see, it starts messed up, but it can come to order. So I got a question for you. How good are you at solving a Rubik's Cube? You might be level A. A what? I have no idea what you're talking about. You could say, I'm probably below average, or I'm average. hold my own. Maybe you're a person that has some experience with it. Naomi, in her senility that's starting, said that she was really good at it at one time. But she wasn't very good at it this week. She's gone from above average to average. Or are you at this level? I could solve 3 of them in 20 seconds while juggling them. Are you at that level? Because this guy is. Do they look messed up to you? Are you counting? Do you see order in chaos? I could juggle them, but you know what? I can't do that. Let's give that a round of applause. That was, told you, Kira. I said, do you want to see another level? Let's just see that one more time. Look at that. Chaos. Is this a little bit of mental dexterity? Not only juggling, but moving them. Clicking them in your hand, moving them, and remembering which one you've just moved. It's not trick imagery. He just did it twice. Oh. Is God that good? How many of us could he juggle and still make it all right? Any chaos that you have in your life, does it even faze him? No. No, he can bring order out of chaos. This surprised me because I've worked with a Rubik's Cube. I can't do it just one of them anymore. But to do 3 of them while juggling seems like another level. So if I had an issue with the Rubik's Cube and this guy was, nearby, do you think I would ask him? Probably. What about asking God? Here's the chaos I have. What do I do with it? What do you want me to do? What do you want to do? Let's straighten this out. God likes that. He likes to be asked. Not told, but asked. And invited in. See, in Joshua, there was chaos. Can you imagine that second generation? Their parents had failed. Joshua and Caleb are the oldest people. They're leading the nation. They've taken the land, and now what? It took about 6 years for the tribes of Israel to conquer the land of Canaan and to overcome the military might of the Canaanites, according to Joshua chapter 14. It was at this time that Joshua divided the land among the tribes in allotted portions according to the word of the Lord, the size of the tribe, and by casting lots. But they knew what was going to happen. Here's the land that you're going to be provided with. So do you want to look at a map of that, or do you want to read the next 14 chapters? I say it's 10 chapters, but we'll just take a look at the map. This is what it was supposed to look like. Okay? You read through 14 through 24, 14 through 23, and he says this is what it's going to look like. He didn't draw it on the ground and say, here's where you're going. But Simeon, you're down here, you're with Judah, Benjamin, Ephraim, Dan, Manasseh, Asher, Zebulun, Issachar. Any of those names sound familiar to you? Here's where you're going. Here's the borders of your land. Here's the cities, the capitals that are already there. Here's what God has given. We're all right here just past the Jordan. Go. Go and take the land. Go and take the land that God has given you. Now this is the ideal. Okay? Get that picture in mind. This is what it was supposed to look like. Because if they had done it God's way, they would have had all of this. This is the ideal. Next picture. That's the real. Does that look the same as the first picture? They have the blue parts. They don't have any of the white parts. Abs, can you run that back one slide again? Compare them. Keep coming. That's what it's supposed to look like. Okay? See how Asher has all along the coast, Manasseh has right to the coast, Dan has the section right at Joppa. right to the coast. Right over here is Jericho. That's Bethel, Gibeon, Gezer, Jerusalem, which eventually gets called Jerusalem, right there. That's important to notice. Okay, now let's go ahead. This is what happened. What's happening here? Canaanites, 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 all the way along, right into here. There's Gibeon. Here's Jerusalem. It's white. It's not blue. Here's the other part. Here's where they were able to take. But you notice it's not nearly the same size. Dan kind of forgot where he was going because that's not his allotted area. You weren't supposed to be there. This is 14 through 24. This is the reality of what happened when they were sent out. In chapter 14, verse 5, the Israelites divided the land just as the Lord had commanded Moses. Jerusalem remains untaken until the time of King David, which occurred in 2 Samuel chapter 5, 6 through 10. That first arrow. It's called Jebus. The Jebusites. Chapter 16, verse 10, the Canaanites remain in the city of Gezer, which was right there, the second black arrow. But they take that whole region. Chapter 17, verse 13, the Canaanites remain with the tribe of Manasseh, but they become forced laborers. It's easier just to not kick them out. Let's just incorporate them. So the Canaanites live among them. Chapter 18, 1 through 10, the leaders meet in Shiloh and cast lots for the remaining 7 tribes. They realize, well, we're not going to take it all, so now what? What do we already have, and how do we just allot people to where we already have them? Chapter 19, 49 and 50, Joshua is allotted Timnath-Serah, the city that he asked for. Joshua was told that he would have a city. That's the one that he picks. That's what he gets. In chapter 20, the cities of refuge are set up as a place to run in case of accidental or unintentional death. The offended party has to remain in the city. If you leave the city, you can be killed by the avenger of blood. Do you like that name? If you accidentally killed somebody, they can send a family member to wait outside the city. If you leave the city, they will kill you. That's the law system. Chapter 21, the Levites receive their towns and their pasture lands. They don't have an inheritance. They have towns. They're spread all over. In chapter 21, 43 and 45 records a summary of God's faithfulness that concludes with these words. So the Lord gave Israel all the land he had sworn to give their forefathers, and they took possession of it and settled there. The Lord gave them rest on every side, just as he had sworn to their forefathers. Not one of their enemies withstood them. The Lord handed all their enemies over to them. Not one of all of the Lord's good promises to the house of Israel failed. Every one was fulfilled. That is, if they did it God's way. And when they didn't, they did not have victory. In chapter 22, the eastern tribes return across the Jordan. Once at home, they build an altar, and the other tribes get upset. They're going to attack them for building an altar, but they say the altar is not to be used as a sacrifice. The altar is to remind us that we need to go to Jerusalem. And so peace is brought, they settle down, and the war is subsided. That's in chapter 22, 26, and 27. In chapter 23, Joshua warns the leaders of the danger of mixing with the Canaanites. He reminds them that God will be faithful to the promise to punish them if they violate the covenant that they made with God in chapter 23, 14 through 16. You do it my way. If you make a covenant with God, there are consequences. Then we get to the chapter in Joshua that we remember the most, probably chapter 24. Joshua is now at the end of his life, and he's helping the people renew their covenant with God at a place called Shechem. God had been faithful, and Joshua wants to draw attention to that and the people to make a commitment to God that they will remain faithful to him. Remember when they did this in the Pentateuch in the time of Moses, and they did it on 2 mountains, the blessings and curses? Well, they're about to do the same thing. Chapter 24, 1 through 10 is a historical reminder about God's promise to Abraham to provide a promised land. This hasn't happened for naught. This hasn't happened by chance. There was a promise that God has fulfilled. Chapter 24, 11 to 13 are used as a reminder of to remind the people how they have taken the promised land. God said he would give it to you, and here's how it's been done. In chapter 24, 14 through 24, page 369, Joshua brings up the expectations from now on. Remember, he's getting to the end of his life, and it's what's the next generation going to do? He reminds the people that God has been faithful. And then he asks them, do you plan on being faithful to God? In a way, he's saying, when I'm out of the picture, you had Moses, and then I took responsibility, but my time is gone. There's not going to be one single leader now. You're going to be divided into the promised land. Are you going to be faithful on your own for your own reasons? That's the context that we get chapter 24 in. It says, now fear the Lord and serve him with all faithfulness. Throw away the gods your forefathers worshiped beyond the river in Egypt and serve the Lord. But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves this day who you will serve, whether the gods your forefathers served beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are living. But as for me and my household, what's the rest of that? We will serve the Lord. See, when it comes down to it, Joshua can't say, here's what we're going to do as a nation. When you go to your own land, everybody's going to be faithful. Hooray. He says, you choose. Here's your options. Do the Egyptian gods that you're used to? Do the Amorite gods that you're living in? All I can say is what we're doing. Our family, but as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. Then the people answered, far be it from us to forsake the Lord to serve other gods. It's kind of a funny statement, isn't it? At that point, Joshua could say, let's go over a little history. But they say, oh, we couldn't do that. We couldn't serve false gods. It was the Lord our God himself who brought us up and our fathers out of Egypt from the land of slavery and performed those great signs before our eyes. He protected us on our entire journey and among all the nations through which we traveled. And the Lord drove out before us all the nations, including the Amorites who lived in the land. We too will serve the Lord because he is our God. So you notice they know how to say the right things, don't they? They know, it's not that they don't have the information. They can remember, they can think, no, God has provided all of this. Joshua's played this game before, and he says, Joshua said to the people, you are not able to serve the Lord. Plain and simple. You can't do this. If you think you can do it because it's going to be easy, you're doing the wrong thing because it's not. He is a holy God. He is a jealous God. He will not forgive your rebellion and your sins. If you forsake the Lord and serve foreign gods, he will turn and bring disaster on you and make an end of you after he has been good to you. But the people said to Joshua, no, we will serve the Lord. Then Joshua said, you're witnesses against yourselves that you have chosen to serve the Lord. Yes, we are witnesses, they replied. Now then, said Joshua, throw away the foreign gods that are among you and yield your heart to the Lord, the God of Israel. And the people said to Joshua, we will serve the Lord our God and obey him. That's really what life gets to. If you want to have victory, there's two choices. You either serve the Lord and obey him, or you do what you want. Satan leads the way. He takes the credit. He makes you think that you have freedom, but you really don't. You either serve the Lord and do it his way. You can try to blend the two of them together. That just brings a different level of chaos. But Joshua ends with what Jesus preaches, with what Paul brings up. You serve the Lord completely. There is his way and his way only. If you want a life of victory, then do it God's way. In Joshua 24, 25 through 27, they mark their commitment with the standing stone, which stands as a reminder and a testimony that they have made a promise to God. Something that each generation could go back to and say, see that stone? Here's what it stands for. This was the day we promised. We know as we read through that they didn't stay faithful, and that they did go to foreign gods, and that eventually God takes them in the north by the Assyrians, in the south with the Babylonians, takes them over captivity twice. And they don't learn the lesson. In Joshua 24, 28 through 33, speaks of the legacy that God leaves behind through the life of Joshua. How he's known, how his family was. It's one of the few that we read right to the end that there was a faithfulness, and then it passed on to his own family. God has been faithful, and God kept his promise. He also taught them and us some lessons. Will we remember what we've learned about how God leads us through as we face life's difficulties? That's life difficulties as individuals, as families, and as a congregation. When we wonder where we're at and where God is and what's next, it's the same process. Go to God and do it his way. If you wonder how well they remembered, read the books of Judges, Kings, Samuel, Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah. All the rest of it is going to tell you that when they went to idolatry, it just led to trouble. Why have we been doing this? Because the same principles are true in our lives. God is a God of promise. Amen. When he says something, does he ever forget? Does he ever not follow through? No. God is always a God of promise. We take the steps of faith that God is calling. Let him bless our efforts. If God calls us to do something, if we feel that direction from him, if we're wondering what's next, we take a step. We work together. Your faith is not just your faith, you're a part of the faith. Work together and pay attention to the details. When God speaks in specifics, be obedient in specifics. Appreciate second chances. Give a few yourself. Don't expect perfection from people, but effort, especially in ways of spiritual things. We all grow, we all make mistakes. People will sin, and their sin affects you, and your sin affects them. Second chances are needed. We have to remember who really is in control. Do we trust that everything is God's? That your life belongs to God? That your family? That your finances? That your future? That your hope? That this congregation? That the work of the kingdom? That it all is in God's hands? And he is the one that can bring chaos, order out of the chaos. Complete victory is yet to come. One day we won't have to struggle with any of this. No area of your life will be incomplete. There will be no chaos left. There will just be the ideal. That is yet to come. But one choice at a time, we get closer to that day. Those are the lessons that I wanted us to learn as we went through Joshua.